Hey guys, Lavoie here. Welcome to the King of Kings. This is episode 7. We are going to continue with why mankind thinks he needs a king, and this will be part 4. In our last episode, we looked at alliances and how kings will often try to keep alliances going and keep that bloodline pure. And this creates a lot of racism and all kinds of isms. These kings often focus on their house more than they focus on their kingdoms and their people. These kings look at these people and say, okay, listen, we are going to go to war because I need to take over another kingdom and whatever, So man ends up serving these kings, and these kings aren't serving them, because the word minister means to serve people. And when you vote for your minister in office, he's supposed to be serving you. But we often end up serving them and their whims and what they want. And that's what ends up happening with a lot of these kings. And so, in other words, we need revelation from another source. And so things like the Bible were never ever published for people to read. They'd have to go to a church service and listen to what the priest would say in the pulpit. And that priest had to watch what he said, because it was always oversaw by cardinals. And those cardinals were oversaw by the popes. And these kings don't even have a clue either. They're kind of in service of these popes as well. So it's time for our little story. The king is King Henry VIII. King Henry VIII has tons of movies made about him. The dude even has a mini-series. He has a lot of them. So he's really popular. Everybody knows King Henry VIII. I want us to look at him through the lens of the King of Kings. And what I like about King Henry VIII is he's one of those flawed characters. And it says in the Bible that God uses the foolish things to confound the wise, as well as the foolishness of God is still wiser than the wisest of men. Anyways, 1509, he's about to marry his brother's wife. Now, what's interesting is King Henry VIII is not trained as a king, and he's one of those guys that probably did more sports, and he was more of a party guy. I like the old movies that portray him with a drumstick in his mouth, a chicken drumstick in his mouth, and he's talking and he's laughing and he's drinking wine, spilling it all over the place. That's kind of how I see King Henry VIII. He's an easygoing guy. In some cases, he's probably a guy that could be easily influenced by these guys. But at the same time, he's also a guy that when there's a problem in the courts, he has no problem getting their heads cut off. It's like, yeah, just cut off his head. Let's move on. As another king would be maybe more wiser and considerate, like a politician. Like, I don't know, there's going to be consequences if we cut off his head. So anyways, King Henry VIII he's a little bit hasty in making decisions. And it says in the book that you're not supposed to marry your brother's wife. And he marries her. And it goes against the church, it goes against everything. I think he married his brother's wife was because she was familiar to him. And she was around the courts all the time. And I think he liked her. I think he really liked her. And they were married for about 20 years, over 20 years. Anyways, he also wants to impress these kings of Spain because they're very Catholic, and she's very Catholic. And so he goes against the Protestants in the sense that he writes, nasty letters about the Protestants. And in fact, he wins a medal from the Pope. It's called the Defender of the Faith Medal. So let's jump 16, 17 years into the future of King Henry VIII, and we find out that this dude has gained a lot of weight. I mean, he's gained a lot of weight. I mean, you see the paintings of him, and he looks like a really big guy. And being an artist, I almost imagine these painters were kind of making him look a little bit slim.
Please take off a few pounds if you don't mind.
I think in real life he was even bigger than the paintings would have shown him as. And so King Henry VIII I think he's depressed. I think he's like Thor from the Avengers, after Thor has nothing to live for because Thanos is gone and Thor is really big. I think King Henry VIII was a bit like that. He's like the Elvis from, you got young Elvis who's in leathers and he looks really good. And then you got old Elvis who's in the jumpsuit and that. I think Henry VIII was like Elvis now. And he's no longer, he's kind of jaded a bit in the castle. And you got to give the guy a little bit of pity because him and Catherine have been trying to have kids. I mean, he's actually produced a lot of 7 kids, but they've all died. They've all, like, except for one, they all died in infancy. And it's really tragic. So I imagine Queen Catherine would have had this postpartum depression, and it would have been hard on their marriage and would have strained their marriage. This changes Henry. He's no longer the fun-loving guy who started off as an early king. Now he's short with people, like has a short temper with people. He didn't think this in the beginning, but now he's starting to have second thoughts about being married to his brother's wife. He's thinking he's not receiving a son because he's cursed with this marriage, and he wants to divorce his wife. Not only that, he's been having tons of affairs with other women, and he produces a couple of illegitimate children. One of them is a male, actually, and that's a whole other story. He meets up with Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn is this beautiful, vivacious, she's very cunning, and she wants to be in the palace. And she does not give in to Henry as a mistress. She basically says, you got to marry me legitimately. I want us to keep this story more or less from Henry's point of view. Everybody, if you watch the movies, it's always this love story and that. But he really wants to divorce his wife because he thinks he's cursed. And so Henry tries the best he can with getting a divorce with the Pope. Being the good Catholic Henry is, he writes a really good petition to the Pope declaring why his marriage should never have happened. And the Pope happens to be in prison because the most powerful man in the world, which is the King of Spain, King Charles, he put him there, in which denied him his request. So Henry finds new faith in the Protestant religion. And he becomes this Protestant now. And he breaks away from the Catholic Church, divorces his wife, marries Anne Boleyn, and he declares himself a sovereign king of England. This whole sovereignty is not going to be easy. The Catholics aren't going to go down without a fight. They want their king back sitting on the throne and the Pope ruling over the king. King Henry ends up having a child with Anne Boleyn. Anne Boleyn gets charged with treason. The child is a girl, so he ends up remarrying. He marries another lady in waiting. All these ladies in waitings have their eyes set on the throne, and they all want to, have a chance at becoming a queen. And they know that he's a guy that's going to divorce or do something. And so the kingdom becomes a big mess. King Henry VIII eventually dies. He does have a son. His son is a young, weak, sick kid he's smart, and he ends up wanting to keep the Protestants in power, which is Lady Grey Jane, but his sister ends up taking over the throne, having his successor killed. I mean, it's just a big mess. But everything starts to settle down once the youngest sister, Elizabeth, who was born from Anne Boleyn, who was born from the lady that made Henry VIII divorce the Catholic Church. Once she gets into power, she ends up reigning England for a long time, and things start to eventually settle down. In fact, Spain believes that they believe that England belongs to them, and they send up a whole group of ships to attack England. And Queen Elizabeth at this time now, she's ready to defend England. But what ends up happening is these ships get sunk in the English Channel. A fluke storm out of nowhere comes. And it's this storm and it's this time that the Catholics kind of see England as maybe we should back off. Maybe God does have his hand in there, and they see it as divine providence. So England starts to become this sovereign nation and a superpower, one of the most powerful nations in the world. And the printing press has been invented, and the printing press was solely invented to print Bibles. And so now they're able to print English-speaking Bibles, and the people in England are now finally learning what it says in the Bible. And they're realizing, and this is the point I've been trying to make, they're realizing they don't want a king. They realize that in the Bible, there's one king, and that king is Jesus, and that's who they really want to run their lives. You're going to find out in the next episode what happens to England when the people start to realize that they don't even want a king. I'm Louis Lavoie. Stay tuned for the next King of Kings. Thank you.